first lecture will be an introduction to Nietzsche that I've called Nietzsche as Myth and Mythmaker. I'd like to say a little bit about his life because there's really not too much to say about it. It'll only take a few minutes, I think, to summarize. He had a really unexciting life, and so that we need to distinguish right away two things. One is what I like to call the Nietzsche effect. And I'm a child of the 60s, so I'm very familiar with the so-called Nietzsche effect. And that's the effect that Nietzsche has on adolescent young males who read him for the first time and begin to name their cars Ubermensch wagons and begin to quote Nietzsche in order to date women who dress in black as I'm dressed today, and the Nietzsche fascination. That characterizes one's first encounter and certainly characterized my first encounter with Nietzsche as well. We need to distinguish the Nietzsche effect and also the effect of his texts from his life radically, because his life is, in my opinion, from what I know about it, extremely boring. Someone asked me before the class, well, was Nietzsche gay? Well, he wrote a book called The Gay Science, but he didn't publish it, in San Francisco or anything, and it's not about gays. Nietzsche probably only had one sexual encounter in his life. It's likely that encounter, that he contracted syphilis in that encounter, so this is hardly the subject for a mini-series. I mean, this won't make it to Dallas. He was a brilliant young man who got a job teaching in a German university at a very, very young age. In fact, if you know the German university system, a remarkably young age. But because of migraine headaches and problems with faculty meetings, things that I'm very familiar with, he quit and traveled and wrote books. So in a certain important sense, the books that I will be talking about, the texts that I will be discussing, are his life. And so questions about his biographical history, I'll give you just an outline, because Nietzsche, in an important sense, is the last thinker of the 19th century, and also, in another important sense that I'll be arguing, I hope, throughout the course, one of the most important thinkers for our present moment. But Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Germany, of course. I only talk about Germans. I guess this is established policy now, right, to concentrate all our policy on Germany, Japan, and the Soviet Union. And he was from one of those three. He was from Germany. He had a rather famous but brief friendship with the composer Wagner. That's about the most exciting thing, so I'm not going to say much about it, but he had a famous friend. He wrote a lot of books that we'll talk about. He was raised by his mother. His father was a minister, a rather sickly person, as he was throughout his life. So if any of you have had some brief acquaintance with Nietzsche and the doctrine of the affirmation of life and all the hyperbole about health and the Superman that appears in his text, it would be a shocking contrast to have met the real Nietzsche at one of the little resort towns where he used to hang out and find this dapper, rather quiet European man who was extremely ineffectual. This wouldn't be your view of Superman, for sure. Anyway, Nietzsche, the Nietzsche that we know in the texts isn't dead yet, the Nietzsche's writer, but Nietzsche died in 1908, in 1900, on the nose, which is nice if you're a historian and you like to periodize. He died at the end of the 19th century, but as some of you may also know, Nietzsche went mad 10 years before that, much to the delight of various commentators, Christian commentators and others who argue that anyone who took some of the extreme positions and series of positions, if one wants to attribute them to Nietzsche, about God, the argument is that, you'll go mad or you'll change your mind in a foxhole or whatever. So his madness has been a consolation to many, and certainly it was a consolation to his sister, who made the most obscene uses of him afterwards. by the familiar picture we have of Nietzsche as a person is, if you look at this portable Nietzsche, which I suggest to everyone as the first encounter you should have. It was sort of designed for that. You may have seen other books in this series, the portable so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Well, this actually is an excellent little text. But look at the sort of sketched-in picture of Nietzsche with the big mustache. And well, this is the way his sister would had him wear his hair and dressed him. During his life, he had very short hair, no beard, no mustache, very dapper, and his sister had him grow out this sort of prophet-like beard and dressed him in a cloak, and then would bring people in to show them her famous brother. It's very Germanic. It's just strange. Here is Nietzsche, beard, cloak. So I'm not going to say much about his life, because his life was a pathetic ruin. His texts, on the other hand, have not suffered the same fate that he did as an embodied, suffering human being. To approach the text of Nietzsche is difficult, and this format adds one additional paradox to the paradoxes with which we're about to begin. There are at least two sets of paradoxes that concern Nietzsche as myth and mythmaker. The first are those paradoxes that are within his writings. For example, and we will cover these as the courses go on, Nietzsche will suggest that morality has an immoral origin, that rationality has an irrational origin, that truth has its origin in fiction, and so on. So those are the paradoxes that we will deal with within the text of Nietzsche. Those are paradoxes that any interpretation of Nietzsche would have to address. Any interpretation of his work would have to address those. And my task of doing a course on Nietzsche would be difficult enough if I just had to address those. Those are tough. The second sets of paradoxes make it even more of a problem. And that's the paradox generated by what might be called generated by his writing instead of the paradoxes within it. The paradox generated by his writing, by his pluralism of styles. He wrote in fragments, aphorisms, jokes, all kinds of metaphoric tropes. He also wrote treatises, and in fact, in a plurality of different styles. Many of them, the most famous and most discussed ones, are in these short either parables or aphorisms, which are hyperbolic, exciting, brilliant, and have, as I say, received a lot of attention. But the paradox generated by his writing is that the clear sense emerges from Nietzsche's project that it is, and this will be a central issue. Now, I'm not saying we're going to settle this in here for God's sakes, because I don't know if it's settleable, but a central issue of his writing will be the so-called impossibility of interpreting. And many of the issues we're going to discuss are going to concern interpretation. So please don't think that interpretation here is a special philosophical term. I want to try to bring home to you the practical importance of interpretation, and then I'll return to the paradox. We interpret all the time. I mean, whether, we don't interpret in the specialized scholarly sense, but we interpret all the time. When we look in a mirror, when we dress in the morning, and you may notice that we're similarly dressed. I mean, if an anthropologist would notice that we shared much more in common in our dress than differences. There are many background conditions and interpretive conditions that go into dressing, presenting one's persona, and so on. There are many background conditions and interpretations that go into an act as simple as stopping at a red light. Now, we don't call all these interpretations up and explicitly discuss them, but there was a time when you didn't know to stop at red lights. There's an entire set of traffic regulations, mutually adhered to, which embody all kinds of legal interpretations, and that's the background against which even a simple act like that will be performed.